Have you ever wondered how history actually gets written? Is it just one big true story that everyone agrees on? Well, today we're going to peel back the layers on the history of modern India. We're going to look at the raw materials, the hidden clues, and all the different pieces historians use to build our understanding of the past. Right, so we tend to think of history as this finished book sitting on a shelf. But the truth is, it's way more like a detective story. Historians are the detectives, and they have to piece together what happened from all these little fragments left behind. So, what are these fragments, and how do they become a coherent story? Well, the answers are all inside a historian's toolkit, but instead of hammers and screwdrivers, it's packed with different kinds of evidence, or what they call sources. Every single source is a clue. It's a piece of this giant puzzle, and only when you put them all together do you start to see a real picture of the past. So let's open up this toolkit and see what's inside. Okay, the very first tool we're pulling out is the big one, the most foundational, the official archives. This is really the bedrock of historical research for this period. It's the raw, unfiltered material that the first draft of history is usually written from. So what exactly are archives? Think of them as collections of original documents, government memos, legal filings, business records. Now, the most important thing to remember here is that these were not created for us, for future historians. They weren't meant to tell a story. They're just unfiltered snapshots of a moment in time of day-to-day business. And these official records come in different layers. Right at the top, you've got the central government archives. Then, just below that, you have records from state governments and the old princely states. Go down another level, you get local authorities. And then you have the judicial records, which can be absolutely fascinating and full of detail. And what's so cool about this is that we're not talking about some abstract idea. We're talking about real buildings in real places holding these incredible documents. You can go to the National Archives in New Delhi and see the papers of the government of India. The Peshwa Daftar in Pune, that's the single most important source for Maratha history. And get this, you even have to go to Europe, to places like The Hague, to find the records of the Dutch East India Company. But look, official papers can be, well, they can be pretty dry. They tell us what a government did, but they don't really tell us what people were feeling. To get that human side of the story, we've got to look beyond the archives. We need to turn to personal accounts. This is where history really gets its color. So who are we hearing from in this next set of sources? Well, you've got this whole cast of characters. We have diaries and letters from European travelers, traders, and missionaries. We have the accounts of British civil servants, but their official reports and their private letters. And then as we get closer to independence, the memoirs of Indian leaders become absolutely essential reading. Things like biographies, memoirs, and travelogues like Bishop Heber's journal are just indispensable. They give you this ground-level view of the incredible social and economic shifts that were happening as British power grew. These accounts don't just add a little bit to the official record, they bring it to life. They give it color, personal perspective, and emotion. All right, so we've got the official story, and we've got the personal story. But what about the public conversation? What was everyone talking about? For that, we turn to what's often called the first draft of history, the press. Newspapers and journals show us how events were understood and debated right as they were happening. Total media explosion in India. It all kicked off in 1780 with the Bengal Gazette. And what's really fascinating is that many of these early papers were started by disgruntled British officials who wanted to expose the corruption in their own ranks. The founder, James Hickey, actually had his press seized after just 2 years, but by then, it was too late. The floodgates of public information were already open. And this slide illustrates a point that is so important. History is often a battle of narratives. A newspaper is never just reporting facts, it is always framing a story. An account of some event in a pro-British paper in London would sound completely different from a report on the very same event in an Indian nationalist paper. So for a historian, reading the press isn't just about what happened, it's about understanding that conflict of perspectives. But what about the stories that were never written down? Beyond all the written words, historians also turn to oral history. This is history that's literally constructed from people's memories, stories passed down through generations, or maybe captured in modern interviews. It's an incredibly powerful way to hear from voices that were often left out of all those official documents. Oral evidence is powerful, for sure, but it's also a big challenge. It can help confirm findings from other sources, and it brings in voices that we'd otherwise never hear. But Memory can be tricky, it can be flawed, so a lot of historians are pretty cautious, and they always try to check these accounts against other pieces of evidence if they can. So far, we've mostly talked about factual accounts, right? But what about the stories a society tells about itself? This brings us to our next set of clues: creative works. Things like novels, paintings, and art, they're like cultural fingerprints. They reveal the hidden values, the tensions, and the emotions of an entire era. The novel, which was a pretty new form of literature at the time, became this amazing tool for social commentary. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Andamath, for example, used a fictional story to explore the very real sannyasi revolt. These creative works, they give us a window into the social and political atmosphere in a way that no dry government report ever could. And paintings can be just as powerful, if not more so. This quote here is describing a famous British painting of the 1857 revolt called In Memoriam, and it was designed explicitly to provoke emotion, to make you feel sympathy for the British and fear of the rebels. It's such a vivid example of how art isn't just decoration, it's a primary source that shows you a very specific worldview. And art wasn't just about capturing these huge historical events. You had painting styles like Patna Kalam, which focused on showing the daily life of ordinary people. And later there was Kaligat painting, which developed around a famous temple in Calcutta. It became this incredible form of sharp social commentary, capturing the changes and even making fun of the new social classes popping up in the city. Okay, so we have official archives, personal memoirs, newspapers, novels, and paintings. A whole mountain of clues. But these clues don't just assemble themselves. And this is where the historian's true craft comes in, piecing it all together into a story that makes sense. If there's one crucial thing to take away, it's this: writing history is an act of interpretation. A historian gathers all these different clues. They cross-reference them, asking things like, does this personal diary entry match up with the official report? They analyze the bias in a newspaper or a painting. Only then, after all that work, can they construct a narrative, a story of the past that's as fair and accurate as the evidence allows. Which brings me to one final thought. We've seen how the story of modern India is built from government files and personal letters, from novels and paintings. It really makes you wonder. 100 years from now, what sources will historians use to tell the story of our time? What clues are we leaving behind for them?